Welcome everyone to the webinar on Dostoevsky's Incarnational Realism, Finding Christ Among the Karamazovs. The book is written by J Contino, and I'm thrilled to welcome him and Terence Tilley and the members of our audience.
Of our students and so forth. These things are obviously deeply linked together.
Okay, I want to thank our sponsors at the Orthodox Christian Studies Center, especially co-directors George Demakopoulos and
looking at
Aristotle Papanikolaou. Our event collaborators at the North American Dostoevsky Society, President of the Executive Board, Kate Holland, and Vice President Catherine Bowers. Catherine Bowers is also the editor of the Dostoevsky Society's official blog called The Bloggers Karamazov. And Katya Bowers also generously offered to feature our present talk as part of the North American Dostoevsky Society Bicentennial Speaker Series, where you'll be able to find a recording of this event posted if you'd like to revisit. Lastly, thank you to Siobhan Berlatza and Catherine Mandalakis for their help in organizing the event. I want to mention the Fordham Russian Forum, which has organized this event. And I'm the president, vice president, and secretary of that club. But it is funded and overseen by the chair of the Modern Languages and Literatures, Andrew Clark. So I'm going to leave a few links for you to explore. The first is for the Orthodox Christian Studies Center. The second is an amazingly redone and useful, resourceful Dostoevsky site, including the price. It's worth the price of admission alone for a photocopied version of the 30-volume edition of Dostoevsky's collected works, right? But there is so much more than that. It's an amazing resource. If you're interested in Dostoevsky, you should definitely use it. Then you'll have the Bloggers Karamazov link, lastly, which is the third one, where our webinar will reappear if you want to revisit or share it. Great, moving forward with our panelists. Of course, we have our guest of honor, J Contino, who's professor of great books at Seaver College, Pepperdine University. He's the author of the book under discussion, Dostoevsky's Incarnational Realism, Finding Christ Among the Karamazovs, with an afterword by Carol Emerson, published by Cascade Books. He's also the co-editor of Bakhtin and Religion, A Feeling for Faith, edited and introduced with Susan Felch at Northwestern University Press. We're also honored to have Terence Tilley with us as a co-discussant. He is Professor Emeritus of Theology at Fordham. He taught previously at the University of Dayton, Florida State University, St. Michael's College, and Georgetown University. He has edited 3 books, authored 10 books, scores of academic articles and chapters, and over 100 book reviews. For more than 20 years, at least biennially, he taught a graduate seminar on the problem of evil and read The Brothers Karamazov with colleagues and graduate students as part of those seminars. His most recent article is The Fragility of Grace in the Karamazov World and in Ours, published in Theological Studies, December 2020. He received the John Courtney Murray Lifetime Achievement Award for the Catholic Theological Society of America in 2012, and was elected president of the CTSA, the College Theological Society, and the Society for the Philosophy of Religion. I'm Michael Sorgan, and I run the Russian department here at Fordham University, where I teach courses that offer Orthodox Christian minor credit, including a course on Bakhtin, a course on the Apocalypse, a course on Dostoevsky and race in America, and I'm also a member of the Readers Advisory Board of the North American Dostoevsky Society. So without further ado, Paul, if you wouldn't mind taking over. I met Paul as a mysterious visitor to my office.
Yes.
Felt an instant kinship with him, and I'm delighted to invite him to our campus. Thank you, Paul, for joining
Thank you,
us.
Michael.
Thank you,
I was indeed a mysterious visitor, but I had no murder to confess.
Thank God.
Thank God. But I'm glad to be here. I'm very grateful to you, to the Orthodox Christian Studies Center, to the Fordham Russian Forum, And to Katya and the North American Dostoevsky Society, you've all been so hospitable to me, a non-Slavist, entering this conversation. I'm especially grateful to be in conversation with you, Michael, and with Terrence, or Terry, as I'm now calling him. We've just met over Zoom, but his work has been very important to me. And I want to thank everybody who's Zooming in right now. I saw some of the names, and there's some beloved friends and people whom I admire greatly. And I'm very grateful for you Zooming in. It's become, I think, one of the COVID traditions that I hope maybe lasts a while, because it's wonderful to be able to connect like this. My aim in writing my book is essentially to spur people on to read Dostoevsky's book. I think any critic kind of goes about the same thing. I have been teaching the book for over 30 years. I started at Notre Dame, then continued at Christ College at Valparaiso. I've been doing it here for almost 20 years here at Pepperdine. Next year, I'll be at Providence College in Rhode Island, and I'll have the opportunity to teach it. It's like nothing else. I have drawn on those conversations over the years and thinking about the book. And in my own book, I do accent a kind of Catholic resonances, and analogical imagination, sacramental imagination. But I think, and this is something Carol Emerson has kindly said, and I am very, very grateful to her, it's ecumenical. And that's why to be working here and presenting at the Orthodox Center is very meaningful to me. I hope before 2054 comes along, the rift will be healed. Okay, so what I wrote is, I think, of a kind of reader's guide. And there's a lot of good reader's guides to this novel. Robin Miller, Julian Connolly. I still draw on those books in my conversations with students. I think that the book reached and continues to reach readers in the way Dostoevsky had hoped. He wanted to change people. He wanted them to see things, to see reality, I think, in a new way. When he was giving his last public address, his Pushkin speech, just months before he died, people crowded around him and said, "You're our prophet. We've become better people because of the Karamazovs." And I think some of the people tuned in here might attest to this. Stories about, well, that book changed me somehow. It's hard, you can never tell. There's no empirical studies of such things. But I want to draw on Terry's work here, if I may, because I've recently been reading his book-length study, which is wonderful, and his theological studies essay on the fragility of grace. His concluding sentence in his book quotes the last sentence in Karamazov. And he asks, "What does it mean for us to cheer, hurrah for Karamazov?" And in my many rereadings of the book, conversations, I agree with Terry that the book finally, for all its artistic beauty, is a summons to action, a spur to practice the prudential labor of active love, especially in our own particular communities, but always with an eye toward the world. And that's where all come in. The key phrase in my book is "for all." It comes from the Orthodox Eucharistic, the Divine Liturgy, the Eucharistic prayer. And in fact, I have it here on my desk. When the priest prays for all, let me just read. I think I have my bookmark here. I'm using valuable time, but "Thine own of thine own we offer unto thee on behalf of all and for all." So famously, Zosima, when he's explicating active love, we might say that harsh and dreadful labor, he says we are each responsible, guilty to all for all. That's a lot of work. Okay, that's just, as when Markel first says it, people say, "How can I do that? How can I be responsible?" I think that crucial use of "for all" needs to be paired with Alyosha's "for all." When he's talking with his brother Ivan in the rebellion chapter. After Ivan has given his litany of atrocities, Alyosha agrees, no eternal edifice of harmony should be built upon the unavenged tears of a tortured child. But then with flashing eyes, he turns to Ivan and declares that he's forgotten the reality of Christ. There is a being, and he can forgive everything, all and for all, because he gave his innocent blood for all and everything. Grace is real in this novel. It's available to all. It sustains all in their work, especially Alyosha, the monk in the world, in his work of active love. It's the thing that makes the responsible work of active love possible. And I think this basically is incarnational realism. It's the vision that I see animating what is a polyphonic, symphonic, even operatic novel, as Terry has observed. It's a way of life that apprehends reality in the light of the incarnation of Christ, and that freely acts upon that apprehension. There are other things I can say about it, but I think I want to stop there. I would much rather open this up to conversation. If you're interested in what I have to say, Whip and Stock has kindly offered the book for half price. So you can buy it there and see what I said. But for now, let's talk about it. So I'll stop.
Great. Terrence, would you like to respond?
I want to say thank you very much for writing the book, Paul, Michael, and the OCSC for inviting me to be part of this. I have to remark that I am not a Dostoevskian. I am a philosophical theologian, or perhaps a Catholic philosopher of religion, if you prefer. And so I may come at this from a strange angle. Paul's book is, in one sense, a simply genial, well-written, readable commentary that makes connections to all kinds of places that I think only a professor of great books could make, to Dante, to Augustine, to Aquinas, to some contemporary Catholic theology. And so it's a book that helps us see connections. That Paul has told me that he's a both and kind of guy, and I have to agree that that's a good thing. And insofar as it focuses on Alyosha, it really helps bring out the incarnational realism, as he puts it, of the novel. And I think it would be useful for anybody who's teaching this text to read Paul's work. Having said all those nice things, I will have some questions for Paul. First, it's important to note that Paul views the novel through the lens of incarnational realism, and that is the realistic narrative that Hans Frey developed in his work, The Eclipse of the Biblical Narrative. Now, the biblical narrative has a definite beginning in creation and a definite ending in consummation. And the realistic narrative, a la Frey, is indeed one that has a definite beginning and ending too. What I'd like Paul to talk about is to talk about how this fits with understanding of polyphonic novel. Scripture knows the end. I'm not sure the brothers Karamazov does. So that would be my first question. Secondly, I will probably ask you to remark on Ivan, and specifically on his materialism. I don't think that he can make any progress on his inchoate hope for salvation, or perhaps even to love Katrina. I think his mad and fiery passion can be materialist, but a love is something more than that. And so I think I'd be harsher toward Ivan than you would. And I'd like to think it would be good to hear about Ivan. Thirdly, it's something that has struck me, and I've seen a bit of this in the literature, of the difference in the catalogs of child suffering from Ivan and Dmitri. And I don't recollect seeing your commenting on that in the book. And so I would ask you if you'd want to go beyond that now. To finish, I would just note that Dostoevsky has some tremendous prejudices. And I think that we have to recognize those. We may be sorry for them. And as a incipient, or actually present papist, I am not happy with the anti-Catholicism. But I think that is just simply a cultural vehicle. And frankly, it doesn't really worry me. The anti-Semitism does, and Paul is tremendously worried about that. And I think that that's something we can't ignore. We may be able to work around it, but we can't ignore it. So Paul, thank you very much for the book, and thank you for allowing me to be here. Michael, it's yours.
Thank you, Terence.
Oh, you respond now too. Okay, I'm going to have to
Paul,
keep track of all these questions. Okay, good.
I would like for you to actually respond then, so we could do it at piecemeal.
Just a quick response, because that's so rich. And I just want to echo what you said. It's funny when you read the novel, the anti-Catholic stuff, even the Grand Inquisitor, it's not troubling. I mean, Catholics love this book. I offer an appendix at the end that testifies to that. They love this book. When you read his nonfiction, it can be a little difficult. The anti-Semitism is troubling. Why Alyosha can't respond better to Lisa's question late in the novel is troubling. I try to address that as best as I can. It's a painful, and this might speak to your point about Frey and the biblical narrative being whole from beginning to end. Even Alyosha is a pilgrim on the way. We're disappointed in Alyosha's response at that moment. The novel is for pilgrims on the way. So I use Frey as someone who appreciates realism, as someone who picked up on Auerbach, who in his wonderful book, Mimesis and elsewhere, points to the way in which old Christian realism is retrieved in the Russian novel. And he, you know, when he talks about Francis of Assisi or passages in scripture, he's just so spiritually attuned. So Frey, I'm picking up in that way, but I want to say that years ago, I was in a dialogue when the Yale-Chicago debate was very much alive. You'll remember this better than I will, but you had George Lindback and Hans Frey from Yale and David Tracy, whom I love. I find his work absolutely invaluable. And I came across an article which said, you know, this isn't really an either or. So I will go with the both and just suggest that while we don't have, what we do have is the end of the Bible is come Lord Jesus. So we do have a kind of pilgrim's hope. We don't have presumption. Ivan's questions remain. We still have to live the questions. The polyphony remains. Ivan's voice troubles me every time I read it. You brought up child suffering. I might need more clarification about Dmitri versus Ivan and the suffering of children, but yesterday, if you saw the PBS NewsHour to the end, you saw a 10-year-old from Mozambique whose mother and father had just been slaughtered by ISIS, apparently. She was trapped for hours in her foot was trapped. Miraculously, she discovered her aunt and was reunited with her. It's, you know, what Ivan's does, and I think he can be criticized for this, and I know people have, I myself have, but he's reading these articles, these accounts right from yesterday's papers, the news, and he's saying, you know, why does this happen? And Dmitri is too. Dmitri is saying, why is the babe crying? Why is the babe starving? But as you rightly point out, he wants to do something, and that's the crucial difference. But I do have hope for Ivan, and that brings me, I think, to your third question. I would read his confession at court, something like the way, you know, you showed me the way Grushika's utterance, kind of half drunk at Makroy, is very important. It's like a little poem, and I think his utterance at the trial with his references to "Come release the monster," he's being singing a hymn. That's because his heart is light. It's like a drunken man. He's haunted by the drunken man singing "Vanka went to Petersburg." And I would give a quadrillions for 2 seconds of joy. You don't know me. He wants to be known. And that's where grace comes in. So I see him as unfinalizable. It's on the way, but I'm left with hope. And maybe I can convince you someday. Michael?
Yeah. I suppose it's worth pointing out just a correction that Michael Katz points to. By the way, thank you, Michael Katz. My students and I read your beautiful translation of Crime and Punishment for my Dostoevsky and Race in America class. So he says that the last sentence of the book is actually not hurrah for Karamazov. That's how it appears in the translation. But the real last sentence is, and they all joined in his exclamation, right? So yes, that's important to point out. And having made that correction, I do have a couple of questions for you. One, I want to sort of start, that is a shorter question, because I think about this sort of incessantly when it comes to Brother Karamazov, the meaning of that Karamazov force, right? And it changes with time. But you've chosen to say finding Christ among the Karamazovs. And I suppose the greater challenge that it presents to me is, finding Christ in Fyodor. that one's not as hard as finding Christ in Smerdyakov, right? Or alternatively, finding Christ in Karamazov, right? I mean, is that, in other words, there are different readings of what that means. Everybody often refers to Karamaz as being the smear of either dark brown or black, or and matz, interestingly enough, it not only means to smear, but it's also the verb that's used to anoint in the unction service in the Orthodox tradition. And so there's a sense in which it's the kind of mark, the original mark, if you will, this sort of this stain in all of us, right? And not just the Karamazovs. And there's also the sense in which it's also a blessing. And not to say that Dostoevsky is necessarily playing with that meaning, but he does invite us to think that way, especially with the ending when he embraces. He doesn't say hurrah for Alyosha alone, right? He says hurrah for Karamazov, and that includes Smerdyakov in my book, 100%. And it includes Fyodor Karamazov, and so I guess I'm wondering, can we find Christ in that? Another way of asking a related question is with Smerdyakov, his name is kind of redoubled. It's just doubling down. It's doubling down on that, where he's. So it's basically. I don't know if it's appropriate to curse in the OCSC format, but really to cuss. But we know in French what the term means, merde, and it means he's like a little shit stain. Yes, son of a black stain, right? I mean, or a black smear, a black anointing, however you'd like to look at it. And he's just kind of wearing it on the outside, almost, right? But for me, and I think Olga Merson points to this too. In the ultimate taboo, what is the reader going to do with Smerdyakov, right? So this is a bundle of questions, but I could return to the original, which is, you said among the Karamazovs, as between the brothers is what I kind of take it. Why?
And including Smerdyakov, I would want to insist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your point, one of the things that the novel shows in Smerdyakov is how hurtful, abusive words can be. Could you imagine growing up being called that?
And a monster also by your adoptive father.
like Grigory, who God knows he means well and he does well and he does a lot of good things. He shouldn't be written off as an abuser, but you know, he's pretty rough around the edges. I asked the question, does Smerdyakov have his onion? The onion, of course, is this. I mean, even in hell, in Dostoevsky's and Zosima's imagination, even in hell, grace extends. And the onion is offered the woman. And Terry begins his beautiful article with that story. Foolishly, she kicks away the people. All of hell could have been emptied if she just held on and let others hold on, but she doesn't. And so it's a radical notion of extended grace, sort of akin to von Balthasar, Dare We Hope All Are Saved, David Bentley Hart's more recent book about salvation. I read the novel in that light. Smerdyakov, I think, and I don't want to distort the text, has his onions. First of all, we are sympathetic. I had a student just yesterday write a forum post. Her name is Felicity, very sympathetic to Smerdyakov. And people recently have been writing articles where they are sensitively trying to understand what this kid's life must have been like growing up and as a servant in the family. He's got Isaac the Syrian on his night table. What's that doing there? He seems genuinely bewildered in the third dialogue with Yvonne, that Yvonne is sweating, trying to figure out, wait a second, did I encourage you? Wait, you didn't know? I mean, there are moments, you know, no one's here except the third, and the denial that the third is here. Even there, yes, any human being with the image and likeness of God, every person who bears that stamp offers an image of Christ. Dmitri in the last third of the novel, again and again, yes. And even Fyodor at moments, he's a tough case. But and one thing he does provide is laughter to the teacher who reads his lines aloud in class. I was doing some of the stuff, you know, his antics in Zosima's cell, and they're just, you know, who needs Groucho Marx when you got Fyodor? You know, he's just. But that said, there are moments when he gets still and he, you know, what's that for? He says to Alyosha when Alyosha kisses him. He doesn't know how to accept a gift. You're the only one who hasn't judged me, who hasn't condemned me. He's got
or Zosima, most holy man.
That's the one we were reading.
In person.
What must I do to gain eternal life? I mean,
he refers to him in the third person,
endless.
basically. Yeah.
But I think it's important that it's the Karamazovs, because it has to be, as Terry points out in his book, communal. It has to be within the community in all of its imperfection. It has to be an affirmation of what comes across in the novel as integral to being a Karamazov, sensuality. Well, not insect lust, but an affirmation of the kind of love that Grushenka and Dmitri find, that's celebrated Makroy for all the drunken antics. I mean, something happens there, including the dream of the babe. And including a commitment that they make to each other. He is a new man at the end. Let me come at it this way. I think Berdyaev was right. Dostoevsky knew what Nietzsche knew, but he knew more. Nietzsche was always harping on the way Christianity negates the flesh, negates life. It's life denying. Pope Benedict, in that wonderful first encyclical, God is Love, said, is Nietzsche right? I mean, he asks a very academic kind of bold question. Is Nietzsche right? Did Christianity ruin Eros? And he has his response to this. And I think that's one of Dostoevsky's questions. And it's Eros and agape, it's both and, it's, as Catholics traditionally talk about it, it's caritas, and it runs through the whole. Be it Catholicos or Sobernos, it runs through the whole and it brings a wholeness to the vision. And that's why I think it has to be the plural.
Great. I have a follow-up if you'll field it. Unless Terry, do you have a response? Okay. Well, I guess that I'm thinking a lot about Smerdyakov lately, and And one of the things that I think is his, his famous sort of interpretation of the mustard seed, the faith of a mustard seed. And if you had it, you'd be able to move mountains. And so he interprets that to mean, well, if I think I'm a holy man and I tell that mountain to move and it doesn't, then I don't even have the faith of mustard seeds, right? So, but I'm wondering if your book points out through what you call at various points the arduous process of active love, the slow love, you even call it at one point, which I loved. But I guess that Smerdykov's problem is that he's impatient with that particular moving of mountains, right? In other words, I like to make things visual, right? So if we imagine that a seed, a forest of oak sort of shot up at once, right? Rather than if you look at sort of a time-lapse photography and they're kind of at every step of the way they're writhing to grow, right? And there's a lot of action, but we think of them as just kind of still. And if they did move all at once, the mountain would tremble, right? And so, in other words, the force of that, it remains. It's just kind of extended over time. At any given point, you can Google that an oak releases as many as 10 million acorns in its life cycle, right? And it reminds me of Bulgakov's way of putting it, and I think this is very Dostoevskian. I have it written down here. He says that in a lifetime, a person manifests an innumerable number of icons of his spirit, unfolding the endless film reel of his phenomenology. And I have this sense that those are our acorns for Dostoevsky, really. That by being a certain person, we are constantly planting images, and that's perhaps maybe one way in which we're responsible for all. Right, is that constant dissemination.
Yeah, and it goes right with the epigraph to the novel, John 12:24. Unless a grain of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abides alone. But if it does, it brings forth much fruit. And it goes with Zosima. Watch your image when you're before. You don't know what seed you're sowing. So yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think there's an impatience and a willfulness which so often gets characters into trouble in the novel, and I think he's kind of falling into that, Smerdyakov.
Yes, yes. Well, okay, Terence, I want to give you. Thank you so much, Paul. This is great. Do you have something to add before we turn into the audience?
I think not much really, other than to say that. What's coming clear to me is a difference that Paul and I have. I see a little bit more agonization in the novel. I tend to think that there is a case being made not only for incarnational realism, but against excessive sensualism, manipulation, and Ivan's materialism. Now, like Paul, I don't think any of these people are unredeemable, but I do think that they're not redeemed in the novel. And then with luck, they're on their way. As his friend Soloviev said, this was just to be the first in a series of novels about Sobornost, I think. I don't know if he used that word, but that's what I'm sure.
Yeah.
Can you say what you mean by redeemed, Terence, please?
Incorporated into the community that is in the process of becoming an unsmudged, an unmarked, an undamaged icon of the decline.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So it had reminded me of something. Just an instant, it's gone. Well, in that case, I would like to turn to the audience for your questions. I know that we have quite a list of of interesting people. So let's begin.
Do you want to
Let's-
moderate all that, Michael? Do you want to?
Yes,
I'm
I'll
not good
pull it
at
up.
doing both. I can't read chat.
Neither am I.
and
We'll make it do.
articulate. Okay.
Yeah, oh, we'll make it do. All right, so Peter Butyanov asks, would you want to specify what you mean by incarnational realism in this case? And that was a while ago, but I suppose we have at least in part addressed that question. What do you
I can
think?
expand just a little. I mean,
Mhm.
I think Brian Armstrong's in the audience. He did a lovely interview with me on the bloggers Karamazov, and he said, "What do you mean by that?" I said, "Wow, good question. I better be able to answer that." So I said this. This is what I said in the interview. It's a theologically informed. I don't mean that you have to be a theologian to live it, but it's a way of life in which a person apprehends the reality in the light of Christ's incarnation and acts upon that apprehension. In Dostoevsky's final novel, a polyphonic hosanna passes through his great purgatorial crucible of doubt, and Alyosha exemplifies incarnational realism. He shows it in his loving attentiveness to the real persons with whom he's in relation, his elder, his father, his brother, their lovers, the young people he befriends. And it certainly evinces an analogical imagination, a capacious both-and approach that recognizes both the openness and closure in human experience, Christ's offer of grace, and yet the reality of responsibility and judgment, the balance of eros and agape, certainly not unrestrained sensualism. I make a lot of the virtue of prudence, practical wisdom. Joseph Pieper talks about prudence as, and he's channeling Thomas Aquinas here, as, you know, the apprehension of the real and then the acting upon it decisively. And this is what Alyosha has to do again and again and again. He's called a realist early in the novel. And I think that's where you see this realism. And he has a, you know, it's so funny, the author's, the narrator's preface where he apologizes for this undescript eccentric that is his hero. Well, the more you read it, the more you realize just how darn difficult it is to be in a family like his, in a situation like his, and to sustain active love. That's what I mean by incarnational realism. That's a bit of it anyway.
Yeah, well, this is bringing up another point that I wanted to discuss with you, which is that you said that you write in here, which I agree with, that the cross is a symbol in the novel for that which bears fruit. Right, and just thinking of what Terence was talking about the person who's unredeemed being kind of severed or not integrated into that community, and you know the opposite, you point out, the opposite symbol in the novel is gallows, which is sort of the consummation of that isolation, right? The kind of the opposite of that propagation of life and its end, really. And I guess for me, Father Ferapont is the most representative theologically of that, where for him the cross becomes a shield, right? And it becomes a box. He boxes himself within it because he's trying to keep the world out, right? He's trying to make devils disappear in the corners, right? That he sees, only he sees, right? And for him, it's a dividing force, right? It severs him, and it makes him the monk, the ascetic monk. In that case, Terence, unredeemable. What do you think?
In the course of the novel, Ferapont seems to me to be almost a person who's tacked for his irrationalism, and I think part of the strength of the brothers Karamazov is that it is not an argument for the irrationality of faith, as a number of modernist literary critics seem to think. It's rather an argument for what Paul calls prudence, Aristotelian phronesis, and it's practical wisdom. And as the superstitious Ferapont is not practical at all. Eh?
Oh no, I completely agree. Yeah, yeah. It strikes me that he's a perfect contrast of, in so many ways, but in this particular context with Zosima, because for him the cross is a means of connecting, of engaging, right, of opening to the world, and in that sense, I guess Ferapont is a recluse, but he also has a small following, right? Apparently, he's revered, but at a distance, right? I mean,
the monks from Saint Sylvester.
Ferapont's a tough nut to crack. The image of the nut actually brings me, there's some questions. I'm actually doing this better than I thought I ever could. Carol Emerson just asked an interesting question to all of us, and then I'll get to some of the others. I can get to some of them briefly. Bradley just asked a wonderful question about panentheistic tendencies in people like Bulgakov. I need to learn more. I just was in contact with Brad today. I want to read Bulgakov. I want to learn from him. I think, yes, from what I know about panentheism, that would make sense. I'll have to come back to Julia's question. But Carol asked, is there a difference between looking at the fruits of our actions as acorns and as an ocean? So I see him as metaphor, far more fluid, without boundaries or edges. I have to think about that one. Terry, do you have anything that comes to mind?
No, I haven't thought about that one either. One talks about the extensiveness, and the other talks about the fruition, the growth of things. So, I mean, I don't know what to do with the differences. They're there.
I want to do both and is what I want to do. I want a tree and the ocean.
Yes. Yeah, I think that over time, I think that the idea is that over time the acorn becomes vast, like an ocean, right? I mean, but that the faith of the mustard seed is a kind of length of vision over time to see what happens to that tiny onion or acorn. I don't want to mix too many metaphors, but that tiny deed, all of which are so important in this novel.
Yes. I'll let you arbitrate the next one, Michael.
Thank you. I'm realizing that there are two streams of questions here, so I'm coming back to this one. Let's see. We have Julia, who's asking, how would atheism play a role or change the meaning of the morality and race lenses of Dostoevsky's work? And how much does religion affect the other lenses that can be applied? I suppose we could focus on atheism in particular, because it's one that's at least attempted, right, in the novel. I don't know if it exists in the novel, to be honest. What do you think? Is there?
Well, it's interesting you said that. Yeah, because in other words, maybe agnosticism does, but not atheism.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Smerdyakov tries a hard bargain. But...
He does. Yeah. I have to thank Carol Emerson again for this. I once told her a story about a student. I think he's in the audience now. He's a wonderful student. Fell in love with Nietzsche, read Karamazov, was very moved by it. He's from New York. When I described him to Carol, she said, he's searching. The attitude is agnosticism. It's not. I saw the strangest commercial yesterday where Ronald Reagan's son, this was on Rachel Maddow, said, "I am an atheist and I'm not going to hell." And it was just so weird to see. And I think most people are just sort of feeling things out. I mean, why do people want to say very quickly, well, of course I'm spiritual, I may not be religious. I mean, there's reasons why there's that recoil. I mean, there is also anti-theism, anger at God, anger at, why God would allow such things. I'm not sure what Julia's getting at when she ties this to race, but I will say this. Before we read Karamazov in our class, we read Martin Luther King Jr. and James Baldwin's Fire Next Time. And I'd forgotten that Baldwin said when he read Dostoevsky, that changed everything for him. I mean, that was a huge moment for him intellectually. I find that work very, very beautiful. And he probably was agnostic for all I know. I mean, he left his Christianity. And then King, and you quote, I think, Martin Luther King in your book, Terry, you know, this network, it's sort of oceanic, this network of interrelationship. You touch it in one place, it affects the other. I don't know what you do with race and Dostoevsky in your class, but I find at least these two figures to be very interesting, King and Baldwin, in relation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned, because we're about to have a speaker on April 30th come to our class to talk about the connection between the two. That is between Baldwin and Dostoevsky.
Good.
So if you're interested about that, please get in touch.
I want to
with
zoom
me.
in, yeah.
I want to touch on Rowan Williams' question.
Oh, did he write one? Good.
We haven't talked much yet about Dmitri. Can I prompt you to say a bit more about Dmitri's thoughts about responsibility as fleshing out his idea of for all, which you've outlined so effectively?
Thank you very much, Rowan Williams, who we're all indebted to for his beautiful book and for much else. I think Dmitri is right to go to America with Grushenka. I hope my students aren't watching this, or at least I want to argue about this. And I usually ask them, and they divide it right down the middle. If there's a student watching this, mum's the word. We're going to debate this in class. Usually they're split. No, he's got to go to Siberia. He's a good Russian. Dostoevsky did that. You have to suffer. And Gary Rosenshield and I had a lovely debate about this, and I engage his argument in my book. I think part of responsibility is discernment. And I so agree with Terry's reading of the absolute importance of that love relationship that he finds with Grushenka. He does become a new man by the grace mediated through Grushenka. And he's not guilty of the crime. It's not like Raskolnikov, you know, where, yeah, you've done the deed. He hasn't. And that marriage is going to have its challenges. You remember when she's kind to the Poles and he gets jealous and she says, well, I'll show him. And, you know, it felt like they changed radically at the Plaster States. I mean, they're still Dmitri and Grushenka, and they're still the same people, and they're going to make a go of it. To imagine their lives outside the novel, there I'll go to the land, you know, he says, where I'll never be at home, and then come back disguised. Anyway, I think Dmitri is ready. And just the way he interacts with Alyosha at the end, when he says, love Ivan, that's very important, I think, when he visits with Alyosha in prison, and then he says, love Ivan. And that's exactly what Ivan needs at that moment. He has the dream of the devil, and Alyosha comes. And he's got the sense of humor as they're debating the whole escape to America scenario. And this is one of my favorite moments in the novel, and I'm glad we're doing this via Fordham. He says, we're talking like a couple of Jesuits here, aren't we? You know, and Alyosha laughs and says, yeah, I guess we are. And at that moment, one of the ways the lie becomes the truth is casuistry is important here. I mean, this is constructive casuistry, not willful casuistry a la Fetyakovich or perhaps Smerdyakov. It's much more, we got to figure this thing out and be responsible. And that's what they're doing. So thank you, Rowan Williams, for that question.
Can I go on about that one just a bit too? For the first 8 books, Dmitri is kind of a sensualist, crazy, running everywhere.
Crazy.
And then when he and Grushenka express their love and show the love, I think that they, both of them, not Dmitri alone, but they together show that this world could be a fractured icon. I think that's from Archbishop Williams' phrase, a fractured icon, but that there is the possibility, the hope that this can be transparent to the light of God, transparent to the love of God, and their relationship suggests to me that Dmitri has come to understand that he is a new man. He says he is, and I think it's quite remarkable because in the latter four chapters, he's almost as wise as Alyosha. I mean, it's just an amazing difference from the first 8. And I think unless you realize that he's gone through all the suffering, which is why Zosima bows to him. There's been something that's come out of it that's good, and it's good because it shows that this may be the world, that this may be a world of grace, a world of love, symbolized in theirs.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you, Terry.
Well, thanks to Archbishop Williams.
Yes, that fractured icon.
Welcome.
Yes.
And well, Octavian Gabor has the following to say. You've talked about redeemed and unredeemed people in the book. Would the story, our view of it as well, change if we speak of authentic and inauthentic people? I think Paul mentions authenticity often in his work.
Yeah, I remember when I was writing about this novel a long time ago, and I think somebody in the audience, he might be, said, well, you're using authentic too much. That's old existential language. I just want to hold on to it because I think that that which is authentic is that which is attuned to the real, okay? And I'm holding out for this human capacity to apprehend the real, even though we are, of course, limited by perspective and context and everything else. So authentic is always receptive as well as active. For all the activity of active love, there's always receptivity, and receptivity to the unexpected. The woman didn't expect the onion to be brought to her by the angel, and she didn't expect people to hang on to her legs, although it was utterly reasonable that they did so, but she should have been receptive. And inauthenticity is when people so often act in this novel like it is a Sartrean world, where hell is other people, where the look of the other is always objectifying me, and therefore I have to react against it somehow. And they act inauthentically. I mean, this is the root of Fyodor's buffoonery. He sees somebody looking at him like he's a buffoon, putting him in a box. And so he recoils and becomes a buffoon turbocharged and makes his life more miserable and everybody else's. And that's the, it happens with Dmitri and Katerina. It happens with others as well. So it's, I don't know, Tavi, is that answering your question? I'm not sure. Chime in if you wish, but I hope that helps a little bit. I don't believe anybody is unredeemable. Every pilgrim on the way is redeemable.
We have another question from Helen who says, people often talk about the quote, if there is no God, everything is permitted, and that it comes directly from the brothers Karamazov. However, Dostoevsky didn't write it, at least in that formulation. I'm going to write. What do you think makes people, either way, what do you think makes people persuaded by this idea? And what is your opinion on the connection between this quote and Ivan Karamazov?
Yeah. Do you want to take the stab at that, Terry? You're a better philosophical thinker than I am. Would you take the first shot?
It's a yes. Thanks, Paul. It's very, very, very difficult for me to get my head around that. The question becomes whether everything is permitted if there's no God. Is everything permitted? That phrase or that idea that we see with Ivan seems to me a denial of freedom.
Yeah.
Strangely enough, it's a denial of freedom. In 21 times in 6 episodes in the novel, there's a link between God and immortality, and freedom is something that's throughout. But it's really strange. Everything is permitted. That can be true in a deterministic world or in a free world, a world of freedom, free will. And everything is permitted, I think, is almost a a statement of nihilism.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure that I can go all the way with that, but it seems to me that everything permitted is nihilistic, and in my opinion, it would belong better in Rakitin's mouth than in Ivan's.
Yeah. And when you think of the absurdity, the irrationality of the way, for example, Fyodor's buffoonery takes form, or other irrational, absurd forms, they're not free. None of these people are acting freely. I mean, they're acting sort of mechanically. So it's certainly no emblem of freedom to say everything is permitted. How about some more? We have a few more minutes.
Yeah, sure. Forgive me if I mispronounce this. Seekin Kevin Wigglesworth. Do you see in the Karamatas a salvific means in suffering? How is suffering a means toward theosis? This is something I've talked a lot about. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just take one quick, I mean, this never should one talk. I mean, thanks to Terry, the evils of theodicy. Talking glibly about the meaning of suffering is always wrong. However, I cite a letter that John Paul wrote on the salvific meaning of human suffering. And I hold on to this. This is something Charles Taylor talks about in A Secular Age, that in the Christian vision, the idea of participation in the life of Christ, including the suffering of Christ, remains a live option. And one of the ways we try to understand the incarnation is, and I think we have to understand this using those metaphors of acorns and ocean, not in some kind of cause and effect way, that suffering in great time, as Bakhtin calls it, does participate, does cooperate with the suffering of Christ. Does that ring true to you, Terry? Because you've thought a lot about this.
Yes and no.
Okay.
I think we need to be a little bit more nuanced about suffering. The suffering of the children, whether narrated by Ivan or Dmitri, that's not redemptive. They're not being redeemed. It's a horrible thing, and it's truly ugly. I think the willingness to suffer is first.
Yeah.
And then if in our participation and our receptivity, we who are more adult, and where adulthood starts is beyond me, but who are more adult must be willing to suffer, and if suffering comes, to accept it. I think that I think one has to nuance this notion of suffering, and a suffering that is accepted as a consequence of involvement. The Christian tradition says that Jesus went to the cross willingly. He was willing to suffer, but it was because of the oppression, the assassination, the legal assassination by authorities for what he did and what he taught. And so he was willing to go to the cross. Did he want to? Well, go back to Gethsemane. Let it pass.
That's where the active.
We just can't use suffering as a catch-all, and that's where I think we need to work on thinking about that.
Yes, thank you. It has to be nuanced. Thank you very much.
Interesting. So that's where the active part of active love comes in, right? Isn't that willingness to work at it or work for it, perhaps, right? This is a very interesting question for me, because I remember Bob Belknap talking about this, and I have an anecdote from that, which is basically he had presented the case that really in Dostoevsky in general, suffering does not make things better, right? Or the suffering does not improve. You're not strengthened from suffering, right? And we tried to sort of come at it from every angle. The closest we could get to was, except in one instance, right? And that is when Alyosha loses Zosima, and that the poignancy of that loss, right, is devastating on the one hand, and yet he falls to the ground and rises a champion on the other.
Right? But arguably the same for Dmitri, the three torments of the interrogations and elsewhere in Malfoy. And Ivan too, my God, he's suffering that night before. He's in anguish when he's talking to Alyosha, and just showing up, which is so dang hard for Ivan, is very hard for him when he shows up in that courtroom. So, you know, I don't want to be glib about it in any way, but I think that Leon Blow said, you know, suffering opens, there are places in the heart that don't have existence. Suffering enters into them that they may have existence. There's some extent to which that may be true, but yes, we need to keep Terry's nuanced proviso in mind.
Wonderful. I think that's an excellent note to finish on. That is our allotted time frame, which seems incredibly short, I know, but we're also lucky to have your participation in the audience. Terrence, Tilly, we're so delighted to have you. I hope that we do more together while we're on the same campus, or roughly. Paul Contino, thank you for writing such a beautiful and thoughtful theological accounting of the Brothers Karamazov, especially from a Catholic theological perspective, which has so much to teach us. One of the things that I admire about this particular venue is that it invites dialogue, where other sort of, it invites dialogue rather than shutting it out, right? And I'm grateful again to George Demokopoulos and Aristotle Papanikolaou for creating the space for people like us who have these questions, who need to answer them with a kind of burning desire, and who could spend our lives doing it, right?
Yes.
So thank you for giving us the space to do that, and thank you all for co-participating in it. Wonderful to see you. Everyone, make sure to look at the links and get your book and come and talk to us about it. Email us. We'll be in touch with you as quickly as we can. Thank you all.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Terry. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Yes, to all.